Hi everyone, I'm just going to talk you through the PowerPoint in case you prefer for me to do that just like at the beginning of our normal sessions. So it's week 26 this week. We look at this every week and last week we did peer reviews for those of you who were here. Some of you won't have done them, but we're going to sort those out in the Microsoft Teams tutorial today and see if we can get those done. We're also going to need to carry on with our sampling, and I'm going to talk to you about the practicalities of that and how we're going to make it work. So I'll talk to you about where we should be at, and then we can have individual chats about how we're going to make that happen. Okay? So, as ever, we look at this every week and see where we've got up to. If you notice in the red section at the top, I highlight where we're at in terms of weeks. So week 25 was last week. So we should have finished task 2 already. I appreciate that last week was a bit of a mess and some of that hasn't happened. And so I want to see where you're at, but where you should be at as well, so that you know what we've still got to do. So we still need to work on development as far as I'm aware. Most of you have done initial samples, so that's number 1 on the task sheet. You've included process notes, and you've started to maybe annotate and design from those in terms of things that haven't worked, things that you want to develop, things that need to be combined together so that it's a more interesting sample, ideas you've got for how you can do that for a final outcome sample. And so that's what the developmental sampling is about. It's about trying out those ideas that you've annotated and sketched and planned and thought about. And so your developmental samples will be using your key technique and thinking about the things that worked and producing something that combines all the best bits that you've done so far to make really strong samples. So that's task number 4. Peer and tutor review we've done, but as I say, we'll speak about those later on if you've missed them. And then next week we'll have a look at updating your statement of intent at the beginning of the session. So the statement of intent, we started off with right at the beginning, writing what our initial thoughts were based on our garment and our personal theme and what techniques we wanted to try out. Now that we've tried out those techniques and will have developed them, our updated statement of intent is about saying whether things worked out how we thought, if things have changed, what we need to do for our final piece, what we need to bear in mind, things we need to change, play around with, make work. And so that's something that we'll do at the start of the next session. So this week we need to be focusing on development. So I've done a bit of a flow chart here to explain how that will work. So stage 1 we should already have done. We said this was 4 to 6 samples. The initial ones based on your statement of intent, your theme, what your basic ideas were, things you had in your mind when you very first started researching the project. We then need to move on to review and annotate, which is where we're deciding which things worked, which things didn't. We're producing sketches, new plans. We've done the peer review to get some feedback on our work and decide how to develop it further. So stage 2 should be mostly done. Some of you might not have done the peer review, but apart from that, you should know what direction you're going in. So stage 3 is what we're going to be doing now at home, hopefully. And that's developing our final firm direction. It's about putting together our samples, putting into place the ideas that we've thought about. And so it's a second set of samples that we need to be doing. So our first set, our initial samples, stay where they are in your books. We've reviewed them, and then we're producing developmental samples to try out ideas for our final piece. Okay? I've put together a visual on the next slide of how that might look. So developmental samples on the left, the plastics, about how someone has chosen to do weaving, and they've chosen these kind of bold geometric shapes and colours, and they've developed these samples by trying out different ways of weaving, slightly different colour combinations, incorporating maybe slightly different shapes, but they work together as a collection. You can see that they're all still using the same plastic and weaving techniques. That blue perforated plastic runs through almost all of the samples. And so it's not producing new ideas, it's playing around with the ideas that you've already tried out and combining them, seeing what you can create, what you can innovate with. The second one is a similar thing, but they've been maybe more subtle in their refinements, and so they've used the exact same technique and the exact same composition, the exact same imagery, but they've played around with colour and texture. So the one in the bottom left hand corner is pale pinks, the one in the bottom right hand corner is the same image except it's got some more texture in it and it's in greens. And so you might do that. You might have exactly the same technique and just be playing around with colour combinations or adding in texture or adding in some layering or playing around with scale using exactly the same image. The third one on the end is an ex-student who had looked at natural forms and their theme was the sea. They'd done loads and loads of samples to start with. They tried out felting, they tried out dyeing, they tried out doing some embroidery, and then they decided to combine some of those in their developmental samples. And so they're doing some silk dye, and some of them they've just dyed on the edges, some of them they've dyed the whole piece, some of them they've dip dyed, so they've got various colours, and then they've thought about how they gather it. Some of them are gathered by hand, some of them are gathered on the machine so that you can see the stitching, and then they've done some where they've repeated the stitch line so that they've gone over and over them again to try and emphasize it. And so they've essentially just done lots of pieces of gathered silk, but they all vary slightly, and that's about developing them to see which ones work best. So hopefully you'll be able to use your initial samples, you'll have decided which things have worked and which haven't, and then you're going to take that on board and do some developmental samples which combine the very best of your work. Okay? We're hopefully going to move on to task 3 in a couple of weeks, where we're going to start thinking about your final design and thinking about design boards. Kay and I will be doing some tutorials about laying those boards out digitally. We'll have some PowerPoints and some videos and some Photoshop tutorials for you to follow. And so we're going to work through it step by step together. No one's going to be on their own with this. Okay? So I'll see you over in Microsoft Teams. Bye.